Kim, I got to ask, as you look at round one here, it was a unique round one with two tracks that we haven't had in round one before. Has it played out like you hoped?
Yes, which is a lot of unknowns. Everybody talked about it before we started the playoffs, that it was going to be a wild card round, and I think it has fit that description. Obviously, you had the craziness of Atlanta, but then Watkins Glen ended up being crazier than I even thought. It's weird. You throw it in the playoff mix, and then all of a sudden, all these playoff drivers are having trouble. It was a great race, though. And now we go into what's another little bit of a wild card round after this weekend at Bristol, because you think about the next round, Kansas, Talladega, the Roval, a lot of uncertainty there, too.
Jeff?
I'm glad you look at it that way, because to me, it's almost like I want to grab a Jim Neighbors deal from back in Gomer Pyle's. You know, surprise, surprise, surprise.
Uh-huh.
I mean, all of a sudden, we've got people out of, you might say, out of kilter.
Yeah, out of whack.
Yeah, they don't. You don't belong down here. You belong up.
Mm-hmm.
And then this past weekend, a great battle between two people who weren't even in the playoffs, and I think got more excitement and showed more about, hey, you can race hard without running over each other.
Yeah, and without complaining at the end, like, you raced me too hard.
Shook hands. I mean, I bumped him out of the way, and I got around him, and he come back. He gave me a little nudge, and, I went at him the last corner, but I couldn't make it stick. So everybody came out great. I mean, it exemplifies that we've got an unusual playoff, I think, going right now. Mm-hmm. And you kind of skipped over. Bristol is going to be.
Oh, yeah.
It's going to be like, wow.
I figured we would get into it, so I didn't want to.
Yeah, we'll get to Bristol, yeah.
I didn't want to bury the lead, but
I didn't want to get too far out, because, again, you bring up Talladega and Kansas City and everything. Yes. It's like you just don't know which curve they're going to have to hit this week.
Yeah, and Kansas has proven in the last 2 years that it is not this, like, placid mile-and-a-half calm race. It has become one of the wildest races of the year.
And with great finishes. And the thing also is the variable of, I don't think they'll do any more this year, but we've seen so many different tire combinations coming in that's also put an element into the playoffs that we haven't seen. A lot of talk about the fall off at Watkins Glen that didn't really materialize like we anticipated. So it's like, if you don't tune in, you got to get up first thing next morning and watch reruns, because you find out, oh, wow, I missed a good race.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, you look at Watkins Glen, and, we thought we knew going in who the guys would be running up front. And instead, when you get to the end of the day, Chase Briscoe's the top playoff driver. And what do you have? What do we have? Two playoff drivers in the top 10 by the time the day was all said and done?
None in the top 5. First time we've had a playoff race without any playoff drivers in the top 5.
Exactly right. Briscoe wound up being 6th, and he garnished the amount of points he needed to get himself at least in a breathable position going into Bristol. But all in all, I mean, they played their strategy out perfectly. And as I listened to an interview him today on another network, and he was talking about, if we'd have done it a little more aggressively, we may have had a shot to win that race. Mm-hmm. But hindsight's always 20/20 on Monday morning.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. You got to be thinking, Kim, and you watch the beginning of that race, and immediately, before you even get one lap down, Ryan Blaney's done.
I know.
And it was kind of similar to what we saw at Atlanta, when you immediately in that race so early have Kyle Larson go down. It finishes in last place. These guys that you expected to be around contending for the win, you had contenders going down almost immediately, finishing last place. You look at these first two races of this playoffs, and you've had guys you expected winning the races finishing last.
Yeah, I don't know that that's unique to this year's playoffs, though. Ever since they've instilled this elimination style playoffs, just the aggression level is higher. People treat it differently. And so every year, I think we're always surprised by, I can't believe this driver had this trouble and this driver had this trouble. But it's kind of the nature of the beast. And I think that's what has made the playoffs and this style of playoffs very fun.
A lot of them this past weekend, though, were self-induced.
Yes.
And we always say, don't beat yourself. And people say, what do you mean by that? Doing something you shouldn't be doing too early in the race, or at that point in the race, do you really need to be taking those kind of chances? And I think that the key to what this situation is this year, it's the first time I can remember that a lot of guys who basically paid their insurance, fees, whatever, with the extra bonus points,
Yeah.
To kind of have some cushion, man, they burn them up fast.
Very quickly. Very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Blaney is one of those guys that you talked about, had a decent regular season, and yet I think you can see how much he's feeling the pressure, Kim, with his reaction to not being towed back to pit road, but being towed back to the garage, and his team not having a chance to look at the car, evaluate, when in fact NASCAR followed exactly what their rules were.
It was exactly the rules. And you almost heard it, though, in his interview when he was in the garage, because he was grumbling about it and saying, we should have gotten a tow back and been given the chance to try and even look at it on pit road to see if we fixed it. And then immediately as he's saying that, he kind of looks at the car and he goes, it was probably not fixable. So he answered his question right there. So I think NASCAR stuck to their rules. I don't know that there was anything that was misleading or done, outside of the rules in towing him back. But yes, problems early after what was a great finish at Atlanta for that team. But it just goes to show you how quickly you can bleed points with this style of playoffs.
Well, and he even said on the in-car radio, he goes, steering's gone.
Yeah.
It's the wheels just spinning around.
I think he was in the heat of the moment, just didn't want to face reality of what happened.
Well, it's like, when something is taken out of your control, especially a driver's control, that's when you usually see their head spinning around backwards, and they don't understand, what could go wrong? Why me this early? I didn't get a chance to break a sweat inside this race car, and I'm already sitting here on the sidelines, talking to somebody on television about, what's going on with the rest of my season. How are you going to rally back from all this? I mean, it's almost overwhelming to the point of, it makes you almost want to throw up if you're on the other end.
And hey, maybe qualify better and you're not back in the jumble of things. It starts with qualifying.
It is, and I'm glad you kind of brought that up, because so much pressure has been put on everybody to how do you get yourself out of a hole? Well, don't put yourself in a hole on qualifying day. Yeah. If you can stay within the top 10, you mathematically give yourself multiple options. When you fall all the way down to the end, starting last or anything below 30th, it's almost like you are trying to climb Mount Everest, and everybody realizes what you're trying to do, and your strategy and somebody else's strategy is going to conflict. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy.
We saw the same thing in Atlanta. People that qualified poorly were stuck in the back of the pack.
Yeah, and Atlanta was even unique because qualifying mattered almost, I would say, even more, because that first stage was so short. So if you were able to qualify in the top 10, you almost guaranteed yourself stage points as long as you didn't get caught up in anything. And we saw a number. I mean, Denny Hamlin's the perfect example. And you look, they kind of acted like that was their strategy. And maybe it was to begin with back, 2 weeks ago in Atlanta. But then he never gave himself the opportunity to race hard to know what he actually had. So I think it was actually a combination of, saying that was their strategy, but then maybe not having the car they needed.
Yeah, I'm inclined to believe what you just said 100%, because normally you hear those guys be a little more, in Chris, you get on the radio and they've got a strategy or something's not right. Denny is at least talking about, we need to do this, we need to do that. But it's almost, and I heard it said by some water cooler talk, it's almost like they threw their hands up and gave up because they knew they were out to lunch and they didn't feel like they could rally back, which is not their MO. And now they find themselves really in a deeper hole. But guess what there, Brett, guess where they're going? Bristol.
Yeah. So
now, is that a good thing or is it a bad thing?
I don't know. Last 2 times they were there, they beat everybody's favorite driver. But he won't be saying that this time.
No.
He's committed. He will not say that again.
Yeah. I don't know if you can put all your eggs in that basket. That would just make me so nervous. Bristol, one thing happens, and it's so easy to get caught up in somebody else's problem, and things happen so quickly at Bristol, and I know he's good there, but, I would not want that pressure to have to go out and just flat out win.
It's we'll talk about that. I want to talk about that.
I'm going to say we're opening a whole different can of worms.
We got to
here.
give